there. It's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Eye on College Basketball podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me. If you're watching on YouTube, you know what to do to the like button. Shouts to Brandon Davies. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel. Please also do that while you're here. Let's get into it. Today we are continuing our series. We are continuing our series on the top 25 stories in college basketball over the past 25 years. In reality, if you listen to episode 1, you understand this is Norlander's list. Yes. I was not consulted. Nobody asked for my input. This is his list of the top 25 stories of the past 25 years in college basketball, except for the story about Bob Knight getting fired at Indiana. We're just going to pretend that didn't happen.
Yes. And by the way, hold on, specifying this again, this is men's college basketball. So Caitlin Clark will not be involved in this list. She would objectively, by the time we get to the top 5, she'd be in there. But this is our beat, men's college basketball.
We've already done 25 through 21. Norlander, would you like to add anything else before we get to number 20?
Only that Parrish knows the 5 now. He knows the order. He doesn't know what's coming yet in the top 15. Those are going to be for other shows down the line, but he does know the order here. And before we get into it, before I introduce the 20th, without spoiling anything here, okay? Even though the title is giving away like 1 or 2, the thumbnail on this YouTube is giving away 1 or 2. Broadly speaking, you good with the order? Everything okay? Everything copacetic with you now that you know numbers 16 through 25 on this list?
Broadly speaking, sure. But this would be like me asking you to look at numbers 20 through 16 of the top 25 and 1. I'm not going to show you any of the top 15, but tell me how you think this part of it looks. I don't have the proper context to make a proper evaluation, but all of these stories that you have listed 20 through 16 are big, notable, memorable things. Like there's not any one of these where I have to go, I don't really remember that. Everything on this list is going to be something you remember. You might have to remind yourself with some Google searches, but by and large, these are all big things that if you lived through it, you spent time talking about it. And if you were a writer at the time, you spent time writing about it.
Yeah. And it has been, informative and dare I say fun, even though the first story that we're going to talk about is not exactly a fun story.
Oh, I thought it was a blast.
Yeah. Just to go back and, I reread some stuff, coverage of things that you wrote, that I wrote, that other people wrote. And when there's video components on some of these stories, go back, down the YouTube rabbit hole. And it is fun to kind of just go back and scan across. And that's as much as what this whole series is about as anything. Like, anyone that might theoretically gripe over the placement of story 17 versus story 22, come on, like, get a life. But overall, it's a very fun exercise, and I hope everyone's enjoying it. So with that in mind, let's get this rolling and let's talk about number 20 on the top 25 most important, biggest notable stories in men's college basketball of the past 25 years. And it is the University of North Carolina's academic fraud case. This is a story that lasted 7 years. Now, from an official NCAA tournament investigation capacity, it was a little more than 4, I guess, but it truly was a 7-year saga. And this part I had forgotten about until I started to research it more and look back again. This can of worms was opened because there was a lesser football scandal that bubbled up at the end of the 2000s. Okay. And then from that, it became known that football players were enrolled in these classes that appeared to be fraudulent in nature in the greater African and Afro-American Studies Division at the University of North Carolina. The story wrapped in 2017, and we can get to the ending of this because I think the lack of a punishment is why it's this low on the list. If North Carolina actually had been hit with real significant punishments, whether wherever you come down on that, if they had been actually punished, the story would have been even higher on the list, but they weren't. There were 3 different investigative stages of this process as far as the NCAA was concerned. But before I continue with any more of these details, I don't want to hog the mic, GP. Your thoughts on this story, what you remember from it. I have a section of your column that you wrote the day that the final judgment came down in 2017. So I'll share that with you as well. But floor is yours on what happened, or I guess what didn't happen with the University of North Carolina.
I actually think it's kind of a bigger story because they got off. I think I could argue that. Like, they got away with fraud. They got out of a scandal pretty much without scars. And the way the NCAA ruled on it was they more or less, like, nobody really tried to deny at the end that these were fraudulent, problematic classes. North Carolina's argument was more or less, sure, there were athletes in these classes, but these classes were available for anybody. So, like, and that is basically what the NCAA co-signed. That the decision stemmed from the fact that the paper courses were offered to the entire student body, not just athletes. So the NCAA could not prove that the university had specifically benefited the athletic programs from these courses. For all intents and purposes, not guilty. And that just flies in the face of common sense. And I remember arguing at the time, how far could you stretch this logic?
Yeah. Do you remember the instance you used? I have it here in front of me.
I think I probably used some analogy like this. I'm a UNC booster. You just told me that even though we had athletes in fraudulent classes, it's okay because other students were in fraudulent classes as well. So how far can I stretch this? If I go and hand $500,000 to every North Carolina basketball player, let's say there's 13 of them, and then I also hand $500,000 to 8 normal students. And I then argue that this is not really an extra benefit because this money is available to normal students just like it's available to student athletes. Now, I wouldn't actually want to try to argue that, but like logically, that is why this made no sense to most people who follow college athletics. You know what this was. You know why it was there. You know what it was doing. And you let them get away with it on what amounts to a technicality. That is why people were so angered by it. It felt like one of the blue bloods of the sport got away with something that somebody else would not have gotten away with. That's the way it felt, whether that's true or not.
The comparison you put on, or the thought experiment you put in your column was 50,000. Say, okay, I'm a booster. I put $50,000 on a table and two stacks of them, and I have one of them go to a college athlete, and one of them go to a student. And you're telling me that by this logic, shouldn't we get off with that? And it's actually a point well made. Here's another line from your column. The day this all came down in October of 2017, which, by the way, when this actually came down, it was a big deal that it finally got resolved. But keep in mind, we're like less than 2 weeks removed from the huge FBI story breaking in the press conference there. Don't worry, that's obviously coming much later on the list. But some of this was, I don't want to say muted, but the long-awaited resolution to the North Carolina academic fraud case, the way that it was perceived and taken in, some of that impact seemed a bit dimmed by the fact that this FBI scandal, which was just unfolding and we were just trying to get a grasp on, these things were happening at the same time. Although my memory, if you would have asked me before I actually started doing this, I actually would have thought the Carolina stuff was resolved before the FBI stuff came out. That is not how it happened. This actually came to light with a final verdict of no punishment for North Carolina a couple weeks after the FBI stuff came out. Here's what Parrish wrote. Quote, but let's not pretend these classes didn't disproportionately and by large margin benefit student athletes, because they most certainly did. Only 4% of UNC students are student athletes, yet nearly 50% of the students taking the bogus classes were student athletes. Yes, the NCAA might have technically ruled correctly based on the bylaws in place, but the idea that a school could have roughly 1,000 student athletes taking fraudulent classes for more than a decade, get caught, and still go unpunished means something is very, very wrong with the bylaws in place. And quote, Bloomberg went so far as to put a cover of a UNC basketball jersey on its cover of its magazine with an F in the middle instead of a number, and the words "no class" in big, bold font. Even Greg Sankey, who at that time was chair of the Committee on Infractions, I'm not going to read you his quote here all these years later, but effectively he said, this was a university-wide issue. It was more of an academic issue than an athletics issue. But you read between the lines of what Sankey was saying. We clearly see how college athletes benefited from the issues here. But the policy that was in place was clear, and the NCAA ultimately was going to defer to its institution, if Carolina wants to say that academic fraud took place here, it's on Carolina to say that and not us to judge and adjudicate this, which at the end of it was in large part laughable. I mean, the chair, Julius Nyangaro, who was running that department, he retired or was forced to step down, I want to say late 2011, early 2012. And if you go, I went back over and looked at, like, a young Kyle Boone handled our story at CBSSports.com on the timelines of some of this stuff. And there were fits and starts with this story. Like, it emerged in 2010. By about 2012, there was a wonder if this thing might eventually die out. But then in June of that year, GP, records were revealed that showed a lot of it wasn't just a football problem. There were basketball players involved as well. These paper courses dated back to at least 1997. So you are touching the Dean Smith era at North Carolina. In 2012, in August of 2012, Carolina announced that it saw no violations related to academic fraud. North Carolina announced this in August of 2012. This case would not get resolved until October of 2017. And then in November, a few months later in 2012, Mary Willingham, which you haven't heard that name in a while, she was the whistleblower. She was the person who was, in effect, working at the university, and she went public and she said Carolina had paper classes that kept a number of its student athletes in football and men's basketball and a few others as well eligible to compete. Like, it was a major scandal. Eventually, a former Department of Justice official, Kenneth Weinstein, took over an investigation that triggered another set of what's the term I'm looking for here with the NCAA notice of allegation. There were 3 different notice of allegations in this case, and ultimately there were 5 level 1 allegations levied against North Carolina. But at the end of it, that was from the enforcement end. The Committee on Infractions ultimately decided, we're not going to punish you. Remember, Carolina won the national title in men's basketball in 2017 when this was all happening. It definitely suffered on the recruiting trail as a result. We wrote about that. We talked about it on this podcast at the time. A huge story. And yet, with no real big punishment, it's a good take by you, GP. The fact that you think it's actually a bigger story because there wasn't anything. The idea of, like, UNC getting hit with the postseason ban, or to me, that would have had a little more reverberating effects. But nonetheless, this was a huge deal, and in part because of how long this took and how long it played. I mean, it felt like forever, and effectively, it practically was in college sports terms. But anyway, go ahead.
I remember writing about this at one point because there's no doubt it killed them in recruiting. They went a stretch where I want to say the story was they had offered X amount of top 25 recruits over a several-year period and gotten like none of them or one of them, or the number was very small. They could not get the one-and-done prospects anymore because every other coach was saying, you're only spending 1 year in college, and if you go to North Carolina, they might get hit with a postseason ban any day.
Yeah.
So you can't go there. You might not even be able to play in the NCAA tournament. And that was a recruiting tool used against North Carolina for years. And so what's interesting, or at least I remember it this way, they couldn't get the high-level recruits that, say, the Dukes and Kentuckys were getting, the one-and-dones. And so their recruiting classes were largely built on guys ranked between like 25 and 100, 25 and 75.
And then what happened?
They got older and they won national championships.
And came close to winning 2, remember.
Yeah.
Happens, yeah.
Right. So what I remember thinking about that was, it's interesting because undeniably this is hurting them in recruiting, but is it helping their program? Is it helping the program?
Right.
It's a little bit like you play golf. Like, one day I left the house without my driver. And on one hand, you're like, Jesus, I don't even have my driver with me. This is going to suck. Turned out it helped me. I was better because of it.
A lot of amateur hacks out there. Yeah.
You understand. Yeah. It's like I was better off without it, even though I wanted it. And I on some level, I think that is true with North Carolina. They wanted the top 10 recruits, one and done guy, couldn't get them because this cloud was hanging over the program. But then they got the other guys that stayed in school longer. And I think on some level, the program benefited from that. One last thing I would say on this, and you can take it wherever you want.
We know.
Remember, all of this was happening during a time pre-NIL, pre-revenue sharing. And so one of the arguments from people at the NCAA office, I'm certain on the North Carolina campus, had always been, listen, student athletes are amateurs. They're not professionals. They're not employees. But the thing they're getting out of this is an incredible education from one of the greatest universities in our country. That's the pay. That's the compensation. And when we find out is you're actually not even getting that in some cases. And that is like really shameful. I know when you're young, if somebody tells you, hey, I'll just give you this degree, you don't really have to do anything, that sounds amazing. I'm confident in college I would have signed up for that as well. But as you get older, you realize that somebody is failing you. If I thought my children were being pushed through school just without learning anything, I would change schools. You need to be challenged. You need to be educated. And for an extended period of time on that campus, which is one of the great campuses in America, they were failing too many of their student athletes, keeping them eligible to compete, but not actually setting them up to be as equipped as they otherwise could be to enter the so-called real world when this football, basketball stuff's over.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately a very impactful case because, say what you want about enforcement, NCAA, and all that stuff, and this is an issue where, if you want to say they fell short, I understand that, but academic fraud is truly one of the rails that you just, in theory, it should be the thing that really should punish a specific program if it's found to be true and that's actually ongoing in a program. I'd actually argue as someone who's been fortunate enough to cover the sport for, more than 15, 16, 17 years now, and GP even longer than that. I think you'd be naive not to think that, there is some level of academic fraud happening in high level college athletics across the country with some level of consistency. Like, how much work are the players actually doing? How much assistance are they doing? In plenty of spots, it's actually legitimate, but I actually think this is something that's hard to uncover, but it's actually still ongoing and, affects the actual, competition out there. Are you earning the grades that you say you're earning? Are you eligible to compete as a result of this? And this was a major case. And for Carolina, they weren't put on probation. The only thing that happened from a punishment standpoint was Niangara, the chair, who retired. He got a 5-year show cause. That's the most meaningless punishment ever. This dude didn't help them, didn't need to help them. They didn't have subpoena power. It was a meaningless punishment. That was the only punishment handed down, was to a former chair of one of the studies departments at the University of North Carolina. The guy had nothing to do with athletics, and he was the only person that got punished in the end, which added to a lot of the outrage, if you want to call it that, once it came to bear. Let's move on. Number 19. We mentioned this last season because we had a story with some similar vibes to it. But to me, this is the best player of the year race of the 21st century. JJ Redick versus Adam Morrison, 2005-2006 season, the race for National Player of the Year. I'll send it right back to you. When I say Redick versus Morrison, 2006, what springs to mind? What are your thoughts about this story? What do you remember about it, GP? Because this was the last season that you covered college basketball, and it wasn't for CBS Sports.
This is the last season that I was on the Memphis beat for the Commercial Appeal newspaper. And I actually covered both of these teams, both of these players in person. Memphis played both of them. Memphis played Duke at the Garden in November 2005 and lost that game 70-67. That was actually my oldest son's first basketball game to ever attend, was that game. He's 2 years old at Madison Square Garden for Memphis Duke. He has no memory of it, obviously, but he will forever be able to say the first basketball game I ever went to was at Madison Square Garden, Memphis Duke. And yeah, JJ Redick was on that team. Then Memphis played Gonzaga at FedEx Forum in December 2005, won that game 83-72. And by then, Adam Morrison had become like the face star of the sport and really one of the American sports stars that had kind of like burst onto the scene. Like, even though he was a great player the year prior, he wasn't a focal point of really anything, or at least I don't remember it that way. But he comes back for, I believe, that third year of college, and where it really happened was the Maui Invitational.
Yep.
He goes for 25 on that Monday, and a win over number 23 Maryland. Then 43, that's the game.
That's the game.
Like, I remember these games. Like, I actually, you know me, I don't remember games I was at and wrote whole columns about, but I remember that Maui Invitational on watching it on TV.
That's not on the list, but like this is including in the list, and I'm not going to put specific games on the list. I'll get to that on a future episode. But the Gonzaga, Michigan State, Adam Morrison, 43 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals. If you were, not that you even need to remove NCAA tournament action, but if you wanted to say regular season games, that's one of the 5 best regular season games of the past 25 years, unquestionably. And that's what put him into the stratosphere.
Yeah. So he gets 43 against the Spartans, and then they play UConn in the title game. They lose that. He gets 18. But at that point, a star was born. The hair, the mustache. By the time they came in here in December to like downtown Memphis, right here where I'm at, it was, I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but this was the same time, the Grizzlies would have, like we had the best basketball players in the world coming to the city. And it felt like Adam Morrison coming here was just as big as LeBron coming here, just as big as anybody coming here. Place was packed. Game was fun. I had a memory and I just Googled it to see if it was real. Just Google Adam Morrison and Sean Williams. There was a confrontation between them in the game, and they get face to face, and Morrison's like losing his mind. And I just remember John going crazy, Calipari going crazy about that, because he's like, I told every one of you, don't say a word to him. He's crazy. You start talking to him, it's not going to work for us. And sure enough, Sean Williams from South Memphis couldn't help himself. But like Adam Morrison coming to Memphis with that mustache was a big deal. And that whole season was just incredible. He ends up averaging 28 points a game. JJ ends up averaging 27. Correct me. Like JJ won most of the Player of the Year awards. Is that right?
Yeah. So here's how it broke down. Redick won. So there are considered 6 major outlets. I'll say 7 with CBS. Come on now. But historically, 6 major outlets that hand out National Player of the Year awards. Redick won all 6, but he shared the vote with 2 of them with Morrison. They split the Oscar Robertson vote, which is the United States Basketball Writers Association. I'm almost positive that's the only time ever the NPOY, if you will, has been split by the Robertson Committee. And then the NABC poll as well had them share the award. So Redick got it with all 6, but Morrison did technically get 2 of them.
Looking back on that, is that right? Is that the way it should have gone?
I feel like looking back on it, it feels like it should be, and it wasn't, but it feels like it should have been 3-3 or 4-2, one way or the other. You mentioned their points per game. Morrison averaged 5.5 boards. Redick averaged 2.5 assists. Morrison was under 2 assists, but 1.7 per game. As for the boards, Redick was at 2 boards. So like those,
Morrison was better from the field, better from 3-point range.
Morrison, but they were narrow. Like I have it in front of me. So Redick was 42.1 from 3. Morrison was 42.8. Redick was 120.2 in offensive rating. Morrison 0.2 behind him at 120 flat. Duke was the number 1 offense in the country. Gonzaga was number 2 in offense that year. It was a weekly thing. It was a understandably a major deal, because you also had the Duke versus the Gonzaga. You had the big blue blood school coached by Mike Krzyzewski. And remember, at this point, Redick is a known commodity. He became, if not a household name by his freshman year, because he had a braggadociousness about him on the floor, which led to some serious and inappropriate taunting, if you that's even putting it too lightly, later on in his career. But by the time Redick was a sophomore, he was a household name in college basketball. We're not talking about his final year of college. So you had that factor, and then you got Gonzaga, which is like Morrison pulled Gonzaga out of its Cinderella era. Now it ends ironically and infamously for both of these players, GP, in the second weekend, the Sweet 16 of the tournament. And you've got the Morrison Gonzaga meltdown against UCLA, which is well documented. And at this point, Gonzaga has atoned for that, including with the play that we'll get you on this very episode in just a little bit here. But that was a game that Gonzaga should have won. They blew it. Morrison's hunched over on the floor, rolling over. He's crying before the game ends. And then meantime, Redick has his career just vaporized by LSU in the Sweet 16, that LSU team that would go on to make the Final Four there. So a bit ironic that the clearly the two best players in the sport that season, who were jockeying and vying with each other. And remember, Redick, like, he went for 29 in a win at Indiana early in the season. He had a 41-point game with 9 threes against Texas on a neutral they played in Jersey. Redick had at least 11 games with 5 made three-pointers. I think Morrison, he only had like 4 or 5 with at least 5 threes. But it was an awesome deal. And there have been some other really good National Player of the Year races. The one we just had, it's a notch below, but Broom versus Flag, I thought was pretty damn awesome. And both, one seeds, again, a Duke player and a non-Duke player, getting to the Final Four. By the way, those two did. Redick and Morrison came 2 games short of that. It was this was before I was covering the sport, but as a fan, it was awesome to watch. And I feel like Morrison was I say this like GP, I feel like he was a slightly bigger star because of the novelty of it.
Yes.
It's this dude playing for Gonzaga. Wait a second. Gonzaga's like, okay, they might actually be a thing. I'm telling you that there's been like 3 or 4 stages of Gonzaga as we knew it. And there was Gonzaga that makes the Elite Eight run back in the late 90s. Then there's, and that run kind of continues on through, like, they played an epic game against Arizona in the early 2000s. The 05-06 Morrison era, that starts 2.0 of Gonzaga. And so that's why I think he slightly outshined Redick, but it was back and forth. And ultimately it might've been a slight Duke bias, considering that was the establishment, all that, but it was a hell of a race. And the thing that this had that most other national, and maybe all other National Player of the Year races that have been close ever in the history of the sport, these were the 2 best scorers in the sport. It wasn't just like, oh man, they got a big man who's incredible at rebounding, a really good player. These were dudes that could fill it up and light it up, and were doing it at a time where the 3-point shot was obviously utilized, but it's 2006. These are reliable bucket getters. Redick is one of the best college shooters ever, and that added to the allure and the appeal and frankly, the mainstream viability of this race and why it lands on a list like this, 20 years on. It
was college basketball's version of McGuire Sosa.
Yes,
like it was everybody was paying attention.
I want to say there's no steroids involved, but yes. Otherwise, yes.
Perhaps weed.
Sure. No perhaps about it.
Okay. Yeah,
weed and some slightly embarrassing poetry. Yes, without a doubt.
Definitely weed, probably not steroids. I won't relitigate National Player of the Year race from 2006, but the way I remember it all these years, roughly 20 years later, I remember Adam feeling like the bigger star, who, regardless of who the better player was, who deserved the trophies, like Adam Morrison. And it was the novelty of it. It was the hair. It was the mustache. It was everybody's, like, he had his big moment very early, and that put all the attention on him. And then we never stopped looking. It was a special season, man. That was a lot of fun.
2 down, 3 to go. We've got a break here, and then we'll get to number 18. GP tipped the hand on this on the previous episode. A major decision early in the 2010s. But first, let's get a word from our partners.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
All right, Norlander, we're down to number 18. What do you got for us?
Okay. There are inevitably moments on this list overall where it is a remember where you were situation. I actually do remember where I was watching UCLA come back and Adam Morrison's career. I remember that night and specifically where I was.
Stop you there for a second. Do you know my story for that?
Yes, because you've said on the show you were working in the back writing because you were at that arena, and so you were writing about Memphis, and so you missed most of it happening in real time.
I didn't see it live. The game was over, and I went back to the media room, and I vividly remember being in the media room at Oracle, and a roar like that you can sometimes hear in an arena, and you're like, what is going on out there? I remember having that feeling. What is going on out there? And by the time I got out there, Adam Morrison was already crying.
Yeah. How about that? We've all been victims of those kind of moments. No doubt about it. So number 18, I remember where I was because I got a text message from our buddy Jeff Borzello. I was apartment condo hunting at the time with my then wife. I had gotten married. This is 2013. No, wait, I had gotten married. So we are less than 2 months married at this point and looking to move from the tiny apartment we were in to get another spot. It's a Friday afternoon. It's not even a Friday afternoon. We are going into the evening. And I remember the place we walked into, which we never wound up. That was not the place we picked to move. Jeff Borzello sends me a text, says, I'll get the Brad Stevens story. Okay. I think I said something like, okay, what story? He's going to the Celtics. What? At about 5:30 p.m. on July 3rd, 2013, going into a 4-day holiday weekend. And if that wasn't a Friday, it was a Thursday. I know everyone was about checked out for the weekend when this happened. Butler and Boston effectively jointly release a statement. This story was not scooped. This was not broken by a reporter. The number of people that knew it was happening was not many, and they were able in the closing 2.5 hours before this was publicly disclosed, as I think Stevens called a meeting with his team either at like 5. He called it either when this got announced or right before it got announced. We found out after the fact, but this was entirely out of nowhere. A humble coach, a strict rule-abiding coach. Stevens' name had been attached to a few college openings. He never remotely entertained ever leaving Butler to coach anywhere else. And he goes and he takes the Boston Celtics job. This is, if I was ranking the most shocking stories of the past 25 years, this would easily be in the top 10. All these years later, it obviously makes sense in terms of how good he was as a coach. And then he was the executive of the year a year ago, 2024. Boston wins the championship. He left even his leaving coaching of the Celtics to run the front office with the Celtics was some measure of surprise as well. I got a few nuggets and anecdotes here, but I'm sending it back to you. Do you remember where you were the night that Brad Stevens left Butler and college basketball for the Boston Celtics?
I don't remember specifically where I was at, but I have a memory of like either being on the way to the beach or the lake or about to leave to go to the beach or the lake. It was something like that. It was one of those moments where I think a lot of us have it, particularly those of us who are just constantly doing something. Like there's always a next rankings to publish. There's always another show to do. There's always another hit that's got to get done. And you reach this moment where it's like, all right, everything's done. Yeah. It's a holiday. Man, I'm just going to shut, like, I'm not even going to open this computer again for 2 days. And you're just mentally done for a minute, yep. Which is unusual in at least in my life. I feel like I've always got something to do tomorrow. And I just remember having that feeling of like, this is nice. Headed to wherever I'm headed, nothing going on. This is going to be good.
Brad Stevens.
And I'm like, what in the world is what? Brad Stevens is going to coach the Celtics? I remember like being surprised just at that period. That could have happened at any point, and I would have been like, whoa. Mm-hmm. But for it to happen on July 3rd, as you have mentally sort of, clocked out for a day or so, I remember being like, oh man, we got to deal with this now.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to.
I want to say, and listen, because here's what I remember from that. Borzello texts me. I can still remember the place we were in. I never even lived there, but I remember because we were talking to the one of the condo association people that's just like showing you around or whatever, right? And I was supposed to go get dinner with my wife. Like we were going to go check this place out, and then we were going to go get dinner at this spot. And I was like, we can't do it. Like I have to go back home. Like I have to go handle this story. And so I want to say, not that this matters all these years. We're now, we're almost 12 years on from this thing. I think we linked up and Borzello and I were like, GP, you're clear for the night. Like, cause I think you probably wrote a column like Saturday or Sunday, but in the here and now, I remember being like, babe, sorry, night's done. Like we have to leave right now. Like we can't continue to go and check out the square footage of that closet and that bedroom. Like I got to get back to the house immediately to take care of this. Yeah. Like I might've genuinely been somewhere between here and Florida, in a car. I don't remember, but I remember something like that. It's just sort of wild to think about this entire like career, how it started. Mm-hmm. Like, and they're promoting Brad Stevens, and it's just like, how old is he? 36. Yeah. Yeah. And looks 26. Yes. And acts 46. Yes, right. So
And then he spent 6 seasons there. Obviously, goes to back-to-back title games out of the Horizon League.
Yeah.
He is also the man responsible for getting Butler from the Horizon League to the A-10 to the Big East.
Correct.
He changed that athletic department's entire everything.
Mm-hmm.
He did that. I mean, like, that's when you know you've really done something. A lot of people can win conference championships and stuff. Can you change an entire athletic department, by extension, an entire university? He did that. Yep. And like Greg Marshall did that to some degree at Wichita State as well. Not to this degree,
right?
But like got Wichita State from one place to another in terms of conference affiliations, just based on how awesome he was at that job for a while. And Brad did that for Butler. Like, Butler will forever be where it's at because Brad Stevens was amazing in those 6 years at, in Indianapolis.
He won 166 games to 49 losses. He was 12-5 in the tournament at the time. I don't know if this has been surpassed. I don't think it has, although Shire's got a good chance at it. At the time of Stevens's departure, his 166 wins were the most for any D1 coach in the first 6 seasons of their career. 166 over 3 years. Later that year, how about this? It's 2025 right now. Barry Collier, then the athletic director, he just retired from Butler a year ago. He revealed that in 2013, because Butler's a private institution, this contract wasn't known publicly. Brad Stevens' contract ran through 2025. So his contract, when he left Butler 12 years ago, would have been, theoretically, we know how these things work.
Yeah.
But it expired this year. This year, Parrish. That's incredible.
Do you think? How long do you think it would? How many more years would it have taken for him to leave Butler for one of the big college jobs?
Okay. If honestly, this is my guess, and I remember talking to folks, I guess, after this. Let's say he never gets offered the Boston job.
Mm-hmm.
My guess, this is a guess, is that he would have remained at Butler, and then he would have been the one guy who would have gotten serious consideration over someone outside the family and might have taken over for Roy Williams at North Carolina. That might have been the one. But he insisted as this was going on before he left for the Celtics and then after, like, Butler's just a place for me. And, the Indiana stuff has never really gotten real and all that. So anyway, to answer your question, that's my guess.
I think he would have eventually left Butler for another college job. I remember.
He is different, though. I know.
He is. Yeah.
He really is wired differently, Parrish.
No question. Like, I didn't really know him until he became a head coach. Then I got to know him, just like to the extent that he's different. There was one time very early in his career where he was either getting ready to coach against Bob Knight or he had just coached against Bob Knight. But I was like, this is a neat little, like, gee, you're this young and you're coaching against, like, an all-time great, arguably the greatest. And I think Bob Knight had actually said some nice things about him. Like, and I just wanted to talk to him about that. And when we connected, he was out running errands for his wife, right in the middle of the season. And I was like, I don't know many college basketball coaches that are running errands for anybody right in the middle of the season, but he's just a different guy. And so who knows? But I remember I don't think he would mind me sharing this conversation. I hope not. Brad, if so, I apologize. But I remember having a conversation one time. I believe it was after whichever Zeller he heavily recruited at Butler and didn't get it done. And I remember him saying, that's one that, like, you need to pay attention to that. When I'm paraphrasing here, but it was like, I'm coming off some of the best stuff in the history of the sport. This kid loves me. His family loves me. But at the end of the day, I still couldn't get it done. I still couldn't get him to not go to Indiana or the big boy school, wherever it was.
Mm-hmm.
I still couldn't win that. So I think that one got him a little bit, like, okay, but I'm always going to be fighting a fight that's tough.
Yeah.
If I'm fighting
Butler in the Big East, but yes.
Yeah. But like, that would have got, Butler ain't been the same since it got to the Big East.
Oh, I have the numbers. You want the numbers?
Yeah.
Okay. Butler made 5 NCAA tournaments and won 12 tournament games in 6 years under Brad Stevens. And that was 6 years. So we've had double the amount of time since then, 12 seasons since he left. They have had 5 NCAA tournament level teams in twice the amount of time. They only went to 4 tournaments because one of them was in 2020, and they have won they won 12 tournament games under Stevens. They've won 5 since he left. Butler was 42nd or better at Ken Pom in 5 of his 6 seasons. In the 12 years since, they've been 42nd or better just 5 times overall. So he got them to a place, and Chris Holtmann had some good years there. They hired Brandon Miller, who was not the guy for the job. He's left the business entirely, sort of an enigmatic figure in general.
Does like anybody, like, I don't mean to get off track.
I think he just wanted to, he got a good payout, wanted to live a private life and get away from basketball. So there were a couple writers that went.
I think it's a little more. I think it's a little more complicated.
A little more complicated than that, but he wants. Yeah. Anyway, we don't have to get too gear off course. But he was the one who took over. Did not work out. Holtmann was on staff. He left his head coaching job at Gardner-Webb. Did a good job there. Laval Jordan gets the job after Holtmann goes to Ohio State. Laval does a good, not great job, but they aren't hitting those heights. And now here with Thad Matta in the Big East, they have not been able to make an impact. I'm told Butler going into next season, their money situation, because rev share is like, it just blows away anything that they've had the past 3-4 years. So maybe they're set up to be a little bit better. But yeah, man, the guy who could have been the face or one of the 3 or 4 faces of college basketball for a forthcoming generation, instead, he left the college game behind. I remember being super bummed. Like, I remember writing, like, this is a huge loss for college basketball. And I believed it then, and I do believe it now. I mean, the sport's fine, but it would have been better to have Brad Stevens in it as opposed to not. And he became one of the very few success stories that took a chance, took an NBA job with 0 NBA experience whatsoever, and that proved ultimately to be a good decision. There have been plenty of guys who have done that and have come out worse for it, not Brad Stevens.
Last question for you on this topic, then we can move on. Do you think he ever coaches again at any level of the sport?
This is a wonderful question. Because of how he's wired, if you told me it never happened, I would completely believe it. But if you made me guess today, because he's 48. I will say Brad Stevens eventually coaches again in some capacity, whether that's in the NBA. The thing is, like, he is really one of the few guys where can have almost any job he wants, so I may never say never with him now, but I'm not confident on it. But if you made me pick, I would say yes. But I would not, if we come to find out that this guy just gave up coaching altogether in 2021 with the Celtics, and then that was it, it wouldn't surprise me. But I'd love to see him coach again, and I'll be optimistic. So I'll say yes. What do you say?
Life's long, man. I guess unless it's not. But he's only 48 years old. He is still younger
than you. I mean, come on.
Like, I think Brad Underwood was still an assistant at 48.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He's still younger than Brad Underwood was when Brad Underwood got his first Division I head coaching job. So, like, there's a lot of life is filled with
Jerome Tang, all those kind of coaches. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I just wouldn't rule anything out, but he does. And I haven't talked to him in a long time, but he from a distance, he seems like he's pretty comfortable running one of the best franchises in the world. And, if you told me he's just going to keep doing that for a pretty long time, that wouldn't shock me either.
No doubt about it. I haven't talked to him in a minute, but he's always been just amazing to deal with. And we'll see where it goes. All right. Number 17. Oh, if you've been watching on YouTube, give a little hint at the top of the show. 2018, Loyola Chicago makes the Final Four, and in the process, Sister Jean becomes a national, if not global, sports celebrity. The reason this is on the list is because of Sister Jean. Loyola Chicago making the Final Four was awesome. That run, first of all, they are an 11 seed that gets in the tournament after being 28-5 and winning the Missouri Valley. And I remember even there being a little of once they make the Final Four, maybe before that's like, man, how lame is it that a team like this, if they had not won their automatic bid, probably wouldn't have even been in the tournament because they wouldn't have gotten in as at large, but they do it nonetheless. They beat Miami, coincidentally enough, coached by Jim Larinaga, who was in that spot 12 years prior. That story still to come, by the way, on the list. They beat them 64-62 in the first round because Lonnie Walker, I went back and watched all these games, Parrish. It was, dude, It's the middle of June and I'm getting myself freaking hyped up on the tournament. No joke, man. Got the juices flowing. Lonnie Walker missed the front end of a 1-and-1 when Miami was up 62-61 with 9.3 to go on the clock. Dante Ingram then buried a triple, nothing but net from the logo with 0.3 to go. So they move on and they beat Miami. I remember I was in Pittsburgh because I was covering Trae Young, which was there. That was Dan Hurley, his final year at Rhode Island. I want to say Duke was there. I might be misremembering that. But I remember being in Pittsburgh, being in the media room and going nuts watching Loyola Chicago win that first game. 2 days later, they beat Tennessee 63-62. Clayton Custer makes this off balance just next to the wing, falling down. It hits as much rim and glass as you possibly could ask for. I had actually forgotten the cosmetics of this shot. I'm like, dude, that shot could have so easily just never gone in. This doesn't become a story, but it sinks in with 3.6 to go. Tennessee almost I think it was Jordan Bone. He almost makes the three. It doesn't make it back rim. They're done. Next round, 69-68 over Nevada and Eric Musselman. Marcus Towns hit a corner three with 6.2 to go. And then Caleb Martin actually went down the floor and hit a three, but they ran out of time. That was another good game. They beat Kansas State by 16 in the Elite Eight. They make the Final Four. It comes to an end 69-57 against Michigan. But it's because of Sister Jean that this is a story. The fact that, I mean, you've got a cheery, nonagenarian nun in a wheelchair being one of the 25 biggest stories of the century in college basketball. That is a true statement and a glorious reflection, Parrish, of how amazing the sport can be.
Because it can create these things.
Yes.
Jean Dolores Schmidt.
Still with us, 105, set to turn 106 in August. She's still with us. God bless this woman.
She still goes to basketball games. I sat in studio this past season.
Correct.
We're carrying Loyola Chicago game. There she is, just sitting there. Like 105, just sitting there.
Hey, it's more than that. If you're watching on YouTube, some of these pictures I sent to Nada, this is the press conference at the Alamo Dome. I have never experienced anything like it, okay? We're talking dozens and dozens and dozens of cameras, hundreds of media members, people from across the country, international outlets. Parrish, I debated if I had this too low. This was a massive story. Just the fact that you had this team chaplain that had become this symbol of what college basketball March Madness can be. It was incredible. To your point, continue with it. She has an office at the facilities and goes in there most days throughout the season. She's not just like showing up just to be a mascot at the game. She's actively involved in Loyola Chicago athletics, and particularly specifically with the men's basketball program, and has been for a long time. It's unbelievable. I mean, she's an angel on this planet.
Not to get philosophical or whatever, but as you're saying, she's 105 and she's still going to the office. I'm like, man, I would never go to any office when I'm 105. But I wonder, like, staying busy can be helpful. I wonder if just like living life every day helps you live a little longer. There's so many people who retire and they're dead 3 years later. Like I'm a believer in like keep doing stuff, have things on your calendar, have things on your schedule, have things to do. And so that's just a neat component to the story. You ready for this? Is this right? The most famous nun in the world.
Yeah.
She's the most famous nun in the world.
How about this? You know what? I can't definitively claim that because
I'm going to claim it.
We just got a new pope, also with Chicago connections, though, by the way. That's also got to be so badass, by the way, that like Sister Jean can confidently claim and knows that the two most recent popes know who she is. Like, I don't think she ever met Pope Francis, but 100% he knew who she was. And as right as the day is long, new Pope Leo, who has Chicago roots, knows who Sister Jean is. So that's really cool. But there might be a nun or two. There's more than 1 billion Catholics in the world. So perhaps if there's a super famous nun out there that I'm unaware of, apologies. But I think it's likely that she might be the most famous nun.
She's the most famous nun in the world. She has taken that title. Okay. She's taken that title from the late great Mother Teresa.
Okay.
I think she's taken that title from the late great Mother Teresa.
All-time power rankings, I'm still going to have Mother Teresa ahead of Sister Jean all time.
Yeah, all-time power rankings. But in the moment power rankings,
in the
like right now, if we had to rank nuns, I'm ranking Sister Jean number one.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to do. I'm going
to rank nuns.
I'm not going to rank women of
Who better than me? If I can rank 26 basketball teams every month, you think I can't just randomly rank nuns in the middle of the offseason? I could get you
a lightning bolt right there, strike you down.
I could get you a nun ranking by, man. I could get you a nun ranking by. Give me till noon. I get you a nun ranking by noon.
Can you get 5 deep on a nun ranking?
Yeah,
I
mean not off the top of my head. I don't know. No. I don't know nuns. I don't know any nuns. I really don't think I know a single nun.
Not surprising whatsoever.
Yeah.
Not at all. By the way, you got a Sister Jean bobblehead, Loyola, Chicago.
I don't have a Sister Jean bobblehead. I'm a little jealous of that.
There we go. Yeah, there she is. Awesome. It was just, she was 98 when this happened, 105 now, 106.
I need to get some nuns in my life. I genuinely don't. If you said GP call a nun right now, I don't think I could do it. I need some nuns. No, I need some nuns in my life.
Yes, you do. That was covering that press conference, man. Just it was I'm not even kidding you. Like, that's a bigger press conference than Florida had like this past season in the same building after they won the national championship. More people attended the Sister Jean press conference on the Thursday before the Final Four than the Gators chomp winning it all after that. Just a surreal thing and really cool. And it's how awesome it is she's still with us. That's just that's amazing. That's number 17 on the list. Let's go to 16, the final one for this episode. And I'm typically averse to this, but in the spirit of trying to get as much on this list as possible and maybe connecting some stuff, as a quasi spoiler, like we didn't really talk much about Butler and Gordon Hayward's shot and all that stuff. That's still to come on the list. Brad Stevens taking the Celtics job. That's a separate story altogether. But this one, I'm going to combine two different teams from two different seasons because what they were chasing was something that really don't know if we're ever going to see. And that is Kentucky and Gonzaga being one, or in Kentucky's case, 2 wins away from sports immortality. In 2015, Kentucky goes 38-1. Gonzaga goes 31-1. Let's go these in the order of the seasons that it took place, because these are the kind of stories that do transcend the sport. If you can get into the NCAA tournament without having a scratch to your name, that is a big time story. Is anyone going to be able to become the first team since Indiana in '76 to do it? There have only been 7 teams ever that have run the table and won a national championship in the NCAA tournament in men's college basketball. Kentucky 2015, that team had Cat, it had the Harrison twins, it had Willie Cauley-Stein, it had Trey Lyles, and it had Devin Booker coming off the bench with Tyler Ulis. Notable regular season wins over the likes of Kansas, Texas, UNC, and Louisville. Here's the surprising thing about this, GP. The SEC that season, number 5 in KenPom. Not a single game Kentucky played in league play that season was against a top 25 team. And at the end of the season, here's how they finished in KenPom. Kentucky, obviously number 1, even though it didn't win the national championship. The second best team per the rankings, Arkansas, 29, was a 5 seed. Then it was Florida, which didn't even make the tournament. It was 34 overall. Georgia was a 10 seed and 35th in KenPom. I think I was thinking back to it. I was like, I do remember a little bit about the strength or lack thereof in the SEC with Kentucky. I remember that being a little bit, but I think most of that is faded on here 10 years post GP. In the tournament, they beat Hampton by 23, Cincinnati by 13. I was in Cleveland when they demolished West Virginia 78-39. And then there was a thriller against Notre Dame, 68-66. The Irish could have won that. That is one of the better tournament games I've ever covered in person. It all comes to an end, 71-64 against Wisconsin in Indianapolis in the Final Four. We'll get to that in just a second. I want GP to talk on this, but I remember talking about it on the pod. I remember it being segments on the likes of Game Day or PTI or whatever throughout the season inside college basketball. Okay, Kentucky, they're this undefeated behemoth. This is the Calipari team. What teams are built to beat them? Consistently, the team that came up the most often was the team that had the most efficient offense in the country, and that was Wisconsin. That came to be with the Final Four win over Kentucky. What do you remember about that team and that story?
I don't mind that you grouped these together. I think they work together, and it's a good place to talk about both. Because when I look at 2021 Gonzaga, I go, man, that's pretty amazing that they were 31-0 in a national title game. And then they just lost and got beat by a team it looked better than them. When I look at 2015 Kentucky, I go, what are you doing? Like, what were you doing? What were you doing? It's hard to call a 38-1 team a disappointment, but they should have been 40-0. And I really think the way John utilized that roster cost them. I mean, do you realize, just trivia time, where did Devin Booker and Karl Anthony Towns rank in minutes per game on 2015 Kentucky?
I'm going to say Booker was 7, and I'll say Cat was 4.
Booker was 6, and Cat was 7th.
Cat was 7th. Wow.
They were 2nd and 3rd in scoring, but 6th and 7th in minutes per game. So they were awesome, just underused. Trey Lyles played more minutes per game than both on average. Like you want me to give Kentucky the national championship? This is all you have to do. Throw the Harrison twins away.
I know this was a thing the entire season. They had not lost, Parrish. They were winning in spite of this, and it came back to bite them.
Throw them away and start Tyler Ulis, Devin Booker, Trey Lyles, Cat, and Willie Cauley-Stein, and you're winning the national championship. If you don't want to throw the Harrison twins away because that sounds cruel, start Tyler Ulis, throw one of the Harrison twins in there, start Devin Booker, Cat, Willie Cauley-Stein, you're winning the national championship. Devin Booker played 19 minutes in that Final Four game against Wisconsin. He was 3 of 6 from the field. Karl Anthony Towns played 31 minutes. Frank Kaminsky played 37. Nigel Hayes played 37. Sam Decker played 34. Wisconsin's stars all played at least 34 minutes. 2 of them played 37. Devin Booker played 19. I mean, it's just like that is one of the great, like, I'm confident if you could ever get John to just sit down and be candid with you, he would acknowledge if it's in there somewhere, he would have to acknowledge it felt right doing it the way we were doing it. But looking back on it, my God, how was Karl Anthony Towns 7th on my team in minutes per game? I think you would have to acknowledge that.
Here's a quote from Calipari that night after the game. I mean, they out-rebounded us by 12 rebounds. That doesn't happen. You think about this. We had 6 turnovers for the game. We shot 90% from the free throw line, 60% from 3, and 48% from the field, and we lost. What does that mean they did? End quote. I wrote that night from Lucas Oil. I remember writing this late in the arena. I wrote, Wisconsin stabbed a sword into Kentucky's heart, giving this incredible team its one and only loss of the season. 24 years after undefeated UNLV was taken down by a talented underdog team headed to its first national championship, Wisconsin provided a similar script. Both games took place in Indianapolis. Both games were national semifinal rematches and revenge wins. Remember, these two teams met the year before with Kentucky and Wisconsin. I continue. Wisconsin will close out the circle if it does to Duke what Duke did in 91, ironically enough, needing now to beat the Blue Devils. That, of course, did not happen. Duke beat Wisconsin 2 nights later in the national championship game. I also wrote, they'll sell 38-1 T-shirts in Madison for the next 100 years. Pause, interjection by me. I'm actually genuinely curious. Do they sell? There were definitely 38-1 T-shirts that came out in the days after that. I'm wondering if that is remotely a thing anymore 10 years on in Madison. But I said for Kentucky, it's a season that's exceptional, and for every rule, there's an exception. The modern one in college basketball, simply going undefeated is impossible. Wisconsin is the exception to Kentucky. My final thought on Kentucky and Cal, and then I'll get to Gonzaga here. I think this has an effect on Calipari's career. I think as a head coach in this sport, first of all, winning any national championship is insanely hard. 2 is different than 1. Ask Jay Wright, ask Dan Hurley, ask Bill Self, ask Rick Pitino, ask Dean Smith, who only had 2. Winning 2 is different than winning 1. And for Cal to not get the second and to not have immortality, if he has a 40-0 season on his resume, I think now he's considered a great coach. He's in the Hall of Fame. I get all that. But I'm telling you, to be the coach with a 40-0 mark in 2014-15, I wonder if it means so much that he never even leaves Kentucky. Now, maybe he would have regardless. Who knows what the ripple effects mean with all that and sliding door factor. But 38-1, kind of to what you said, GP. To me, it came to signify something bigger. He would have these star-studded teams, but way more often than not, there would be just something, some time of his own volition, that would get in the way and prevent ultimate glory happening. And this is the biggest and worst and / best example there is, man. 40-0 would have seriously changed his reputation. He's a good coach. I think he's truly on another notch if he has that. He doesn't have it, because he was going to play the guys he was going to play and run the deployments that he ran, and it came back to get him in a big way against Wisconsin.
You had the number 1 pick in the draft. I mean, you played him 21 minutes a game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I understand how he got himself into that position of doing it and thinking it was best. And I guess when you're just winning one game after another and you're like quite literally 38-0, it's like, well, this is working. But I don't care what your record is. You will never convince me that you are maximizing your team with Devin Booker and Karl Anthony Towns ranking 6th and 7th in minutes per game. All right. You're not maximizing your team. Congrats on your win. Congrats on your winning streak. You are playing the wrong people. You're playing the wrong people. And if you ever lose, that will be the main reason. And that's what happened.
This is ghost of chasing 76 Indiana as well. Okay, so let's go to Gonzaga 2021. This is the COVID bubble tournament. This is what I wrote the morning of the title game. Don't know what's going to happen that night. I said, should Gonzaga lose at the hands of the sport's second best squad, then they still should be considered among the greatest teams ever. Put them alongside the likes of 1991 UNLV, 1999 Duke, and 2015 Kentucky is the best not to win a championship. Those were amazing teams and are still referred to as such. We should do the same with Gonzaga. Should Baylor become the first team in 36 games to knock off the Zags? I also wrote, from a practical viewpoint, Gonzaga's path to Monday night also needs to be considered within the conditions of the season. There's never been an NCAA tournament champion that's lived through and competed under the cloud of a pandemic. Changes to everyday life around the globe had micro and macro impacts on how college basketball season was held. Gonzaga not playing an as-usual schedule inventory is offset by the rigors and restrictions of the pandemic. If you want to put an asterisk on this year's champion, that asterisk can only signify a bonus, as it would be a reflection on the most challenging season in history. Parrish. Some things that are forgotten about that 21 title game, other than Baylor came out roaring, Gonzaga never had a lead, and the Bears just dominated. It was the highest combined winning percentage for a national championship game in the history of the sport. Gonzaga and Baylor combined for 2 losses, which was the fewest, tied for the fewest ever, with 57 and 66 by 2 teams entering a national title game. It was the first title game since 2005 that featured the 2 top seeds by the selection committee going into the tournament there. And they were also, this is also forgotten after the fact, that preseason, Gonzaga and Baylor were number 1 and number 2 heading into the season. So they lived up to all of their anticipation, all of their hype. Gonzaga's coming off the Suggs 37-footer to beat UCLA in overtime after that. It was only the second game the entire season. I believe that they were held to a single-digit margin. Gonzaga beat teams by 22.4 points that season, GP. One of the all-time dominant teams. It easily finished number 1 at KenPom, even though it lost to Baylor there. That was an incredible team, and I do feel now we're only 4 years on, but I feel like its greatness is a little bit diminished 4 years later. Maybe people listening will disagree. I know Gonzaga fans won't disagree.
People do not think of them the way you described them in that
and
column.
Well, this is part of why I want to do this podcast in this series, because that Gonzaga team was absurdly dominant. Take the mic here, GP. But if you're wondering, okay, who was on the team? Refresh my memory. You had Suggs, you had Drew Timme at the height of his powers, Anton Watson, Joel Ayayi, Corey Kispert, Andrew Nembhard, and Julian Strother came off the bench. They were outrageously dominant that season. They rolled through every high major team they played in the non-conference. And again, they had 2 games, I think, total that season that were decided by single digits.
You look back on that roster, it feels a little more talented in hindsight. Because, like, have you watched Andrew Nembhard lately?
Right.
Kispert's in the NBA. Suggs is in the NBA. Timme was an All-American. Julian Strother's in the NBA.
Yep.
I mean, super talented. But I think the way it ended shapes the way we remember it. They got smacked.
They got absolutely rolled. Yeah.
And right from the jump.
I remember because you were outside the seating for that was different than all the other Final Fours, of course. So I'm in the end zone seating, and I remember it was like at the under 12 of the first half, being like, "Is this going to go this way? Like, is an all-time great team going to not be competitive in the national championship game? And is this going to alter?" Because when we talked about it that morning or GP the Sunday night before, my whole thing was like, even if they lose, this is an all-time great team. I don't care how it goes. I actually still hold that opinion. But, and I remember, and now it's all coming back to me in real time. I remember you talking to me on the show being like, you lose like this, like, can you really say it? Like, do they deserve to have this attached to them moving forward if you lose the way that they lost? Because Baylor, it was just, I mean, that Baylor team was also extremely good. And it was just, it was varsity versus JV that night. So if people don't want to put them on that tier, I'm not going to fight you on that. Personally, I look at the data. I look at what they did across 32 games in a COVID season. I still put them on the list of like the 4 or 5 best teams ever not to win a national championship. But yet again, we were fortunate enough in this sport to have a team get to the Final Four, in this case, literally the last game of the season without a loss. That's a blessing, but I don't know if we're ever seeing a team run the table again in our lifetime, Parrish. It's just now that and that was a COVID-shortened season. Gonzaga only had to get to 32 games. Right. Typically now it's going to be 40. In the future, it's going to be 41, 42. Never say never, going back to what we said earlier, but I would pick no. That if you say yes or no, are we going to see a national champion that's undefeated between now and the end of our lives? I would actually lean no there.
I'd never say never, but
which way would you lean?
I would lean toward I won't see it with my own eyes.
Yeah.
Maybe my future grandkids could, but I don't know that I'll see it with my own. I can appreciate all the data. I won't argue with it. I think if you decided next week to put out a list of the best teams to ever not win a national championship in college basketball and you had them in the top 5, people would call you stupid, even if you supported it brilliantly, because still people, I don't even know if this is true anymore, but it was still kind of true then. Folks are just skeptical of the WCC team. They just, they just are. And any opportunity to say, see, I told you so, folks are going to take that. There's one thing Mark Few had subsequently said to all this that I think it's just always stuck with me, and I believe there's some truth to it. If not, it's entirely true. They were supposed to play at the Pentagon early in that season, and it got canceled. I want to say 30 minutes before game.
It was it was
like a CBS game.
It was a CBS game. Was it the Pentagon or was it I want to say it was Indianapolis? I could be wrong. I remember the whole thing. Oh God, yeah, that we were about to go to air, and it was we don't know if we can play this, and they had to cancel. Good recall on that, Parrish.
Yeah, so that. But the point I remember Mark making, and I hope he made this point. I hope I'm not just making this up. Was that he wishes they would have played that game, even if they would have lost that game, because when they got on the court with Baylor, they were not ready for what was coming. And if they'd have felt that in November or December, whenever that previous game was scheduled, it wouldn't have been a shock to the system. Mark had said, we thought we were just playing a basketball game. He said something like this. We thought we had a basketball game and they thought they had a fight. He said, I looked down there and I could see in their eyes they were ready to come get us. And my guys didn't look that way. And the truth is, I think if you go back and just look at the play-by-play, after a while, the game just sort of played out even from a points perspective. But they just jumped them so big, the Zags could never catch up, even if you played them even from that point. That's the way math works. I don't have to explain that to you. But it just got out of hand very quickly. Once they settled in, they could play them possession for possession, basically. But by the time they settled in, the game was over.
Yeah, that's a good point on how they met him would have affected it. I don't know.
You just know then, all right, these guys are trying to kill us.
Yeah.
This dude is never going to let you catch the ball. You would just be better equipped to know what you're dealing with. By the time Gonzaga understood what it was dealing with on that night, the game was over.
Yep. And Gonzaga's coming off that just thrilling but exhausting. They had the second game with the win over UCLA, and Baylor's pounced. 2 more stats on that Gonzaga team. It's the best 2-point shooting team in the history of college basketball. They made 63.9% of their shots inside the arc. There's never been a team in a season that's been more accurate than Gonzaga was that season. And they also did something that hadn't been done in at least 60 years, according to Elias. They won 23 straight games by double digits. That had not been done in 60-plus years by any men's Division I team. It was an incredibly dominant team that hit the wrong team on the wrong night and could never recover there. And so as a result, Gonzaga and Kentucky, they have distinct legacies that are a notch or two below what they otherwise would have been. Because if you can win a national championship and go undefeated, you are really for the ages there. But they got too close to the sun and got burned.
I like this little thing you put together.
Thanks, bud.
Man, I wish it had Bob Knight's termination in it. But other than that, I'm enjoying this. In all seriousness, we talked on a previous episode about this is what happens when people die, like Brian Wilson died. And I just immediately turn on Pet Sounds and start reading. And I just it takes me down memory lane and I enjoy that experience. I hate that somebody had to pass for me to have this experience, but once I sit, I hear Brian Wilson is dead at 82 and I go, okay, let me get into this. And I find myself enjoying spending time doing what I'm doing. And this is similar. I would never go back and look at this stuff ever. Maybe ever. But this forces me to go back and look at it. And when I go back and look at it, I these memories get conjured up and I don't know. I'm just enjoying the exercise. So thank you for doing it.
No doubt. And I hope our viewers and listeners are enjoying it as well. We're not even halfway through. We're going to extend this on throughout the rest of June and then even in July. So I think our next edition, our episode 3, if you will. I think that will come after the NBA draft. We'll get some draft content going later this week as well. And then next week we've got the draft, and GP and I will react to the first round and all that stuff. So we're going to lean into some prospect stuff, but we'll continue on with this closer to the end of June and bring it on in July. And GP, that is a show.
Let's get out of here. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Terry Teagle. He's a legend. Huck Larnell. Thank you guys once again for watching, listening to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. More of us than there are of them. That needs to be reflected in the comments. So do that. We'll talk to you again real soon. Till then, take care.